What if you were Jewish and no one ever told you? No menorah, no Hebrew, no whispered stories of Sepharad at your grandmother's table. Just silence, until a tiny piece of your DNA said otherwise. Across Latin America, in dusty town archives and quiet border villages, people are discovering a hidden thread stitched deep into their blood. A surname that doesn't belong. A kitchen ritual passed down with no name. And then confirmation. Sephardic Jewish markers. Carried silently, generation after generation, across oceans and centuries. The numbers are staggering. Geneticists now believe that over 200 million people might descend from Sephardic Jews, most with no idea. That's more than 10 times the number of Jews alive today. A population that was supposed to vanish never did. It just changed form, slipped underground, disguised itself behind forced baptisms and forgotten tongues. In 1492, the Catholic monarchs of Spain issued a decree, convert or leave. But for those who stayed, identity wasn't just erased, it was camouflaged. Publicly, they were Catholic. In secret, they hid scraps of Hebrew under floorboards. They lit candles behind curtains. They whispered ancient prayers in a language their children didn't understand. The world called them conversos. Others, crypto-Jews. But their blood kept a secret of its own. Centuries later, commercial DNA tests started picking up pieces no one expected. A Sephardic cluster in New Mexico. A Turkish maternal line in rural Portugal. Echoes from Salonika to Sao Paulo. Families who thought they were Spanish, Berber, Portuguese, now caught between names, between histories, between two forgotten homes. How could so many carry the same forgotten code? How could a diaspora survive without synagogues, without books, without even its own voice? That's the paradox. A people erased from the record, yet still imprinted in the genome. But if this many descendants exist today, if this bloodline was never truly lost, then one question remains. Where did it all begin? Before Spain had a flag, before it even had a name, a ship arrived on the western shore of what we now call Iberia. No record survives of that landing. No scroll, no stone. But deep beneath the soil of Ibiza, someone carved Hebrew letters onto an amphora and left it buried. It's dated to the 4th century. But some claim the Jews came even earlier, exiled after Babylon, or scattered by Rome, long before Christendom or Islam had shaped the land. Back then, they were farmers, traders, translators. They spoke Latin, maybe Aramaic, maybe both. They weren't yet called Sephardim, but they were there. And then, 613 CE, a king named Sisebut issued a decree. Every Jew in Visigothic Spain must convert, or be expelled. No synagogues, no Sabbath, no names that marked them as other. Some left, most stayed. But what they did next shaped a secret that would echo for centuries. They didn't stop being Jewish. They stopped being seen. They married in whispers, taught their sons Hebrew under candlelight, buried their dead in silence. They learned how to wear another name, like a second skin. Crypto-Judaism didn't start in 1492. It began here, under the shadow of Sisebut's crown. Before the Inquisition, before Columbus, before the word Spain meant anything at all. And somehow, through empire, conquest, crusade, and silence, those roots held. Beneath layers of war, religion, and forgetting, Sephardic blood kept pulsing beneath the surface. You can feel it in the bones of villages that no longer remember. You can hear it in lullabies sung in Ladino, tucked inside Portuguese homes that never spoke its name. But what came next wasn't just about survival. Because in exile, something unexpected happened. 1,000 years ago, in the heart of Muslim Spain, Jews were not hiding. They were thriving. Córdoba echoed with the sound of debate, rabbis arguing philosophy beside imams and monks. Jewish poets wrote in Arabic. Jewish doctors served caliphs. And in the shadows of minarets, Jewish children learned to read both Torah and geometry. This was Al-Andalus, a strange miracle where a minority once persecuted under Visigoths suddenly became part of a golden age. But it wasn't just books and brilliance. Something else was happening, quieter, deeper. Bloodlines were shifting. Under Muslim rule, Jews and Moors lived close, in the same markets, the same kitchens. Some married, others blended by proximity. And slowly, without ceremony, DNA began to mix. Sephardic Jews absorbed traces of Berber blood. North African markers entered the Jewish genome, not from conquest, from coexistence. This part of the story doesn't live in textbooks. It lives in the invisible, within chromosomes, in haplogroups that whisper across centuries. But that golden age had a shadow, because peace here was fragile. It depended on rulers who tolerated difference, until they didn't. The Almohads arrived from North Africa with a sword in one hand and a warning in the other. Convert or die. So the exodus began. Some fled east, toward more tolerant lands. Others stayed and changed their names again. The light of Al-Andalus dimmed, replaced by crosses and kings. The Reconquista wasn't just about territory. It was about identity. And for Jews, it marked the return of an old nightmare with a new face. The tension reached a boiling point. And then came the year. The decree. The moment that would turn a flourishing world into a forced diaspora. The year that would change everything. 1492. They called it the Alhambra Decree. But to the Jews of Spain, it was a final sentence. In 1492, as Columbus prepared his ships, Ferdinand and Isabella prepared an ultimatum. Convert or leave. No more debates. No more delays. Just a royal seal, and the weight of exile crashing down on thousands of families. Mothers wrapped heirlooms in prayer shawls. Fathers whispered blessings through clenched teeth. Children, too young to understand, watched their homes vanish behind them. But not everyone left. Some stayed. Some hid. They burned their books, lit candles in cellars, buried mezuzahs behind false walls. And overnight, Judaism was forced underground. Crypto-Jews, they were called. Secret Jews. Pretending by day, preserving by night. But here's the twist. The paradox. That act of conversion, meant to erase them, did the opposite. It scattered them. Across the Ottoman Empire, Sephardic families built new synagogues in Turkish towns. In Morocco and Algeria, Ladino mingled with Arabic in markets and kitchens. In Amsterdam, London, Livorno, new names, new lives, but the same ancestral code. And in the Americas, they followed conquistadors across oceans. Some as merchants, others as new Christians, still hiding, still watching. DNA doesn't forget. And centuries later, Sephardic signatures appear in places no one expected. Cuba, Curacao, Brazil, New Mexico. A silent dispersion encoded in blood. But not every story crossed the sea. Not every family packed their books. Some stayed, blending in so completely. They vanished, without ever leaving. They disappeared into plain sight. In the mountains of Portugal, there's a village where time stopped whispering Hebrew, but the blood kept speaking it. Belmonte, a place so remote, so quiet, it became a vault. Not for gold, for memory. For centuries, the families here lit candles on Friday nights in clay pots, hidden behind curtains. They recited blessings, with no words. They passed down customs with no names. Even their children didn't know why, only that they must never ask. No Torah, no synagogue, just rituals, stripped bare, carried in silence. And then came the DNA. Researchers swabbed a few cheeks in Belmonte, and what they found was stunning. 93% of the women shared the exact same mitochondrial lineage, HV0b, a Sephardic signature so concentrated, it could only mean one thing: isolation. A single maternal ancestor, carried forward, generation after generation, untouched. This wasn't just a memory. This was a fossil. But just 200 kilometers away, another village told a different story. Briganka, also crypto-Jewish, also hidden, but genetically a kaleidoscope. 41 different paternal haplotypes, 32 distinct maternal lineages, traces of Western Europe, the Levant, even Berber lines from North Africa. How did two communities, both in hiding, both under threat, preserve such different legacies? One clinging to a single thread, the other somehow weaving a tapestry. Maybe they married differently. Maybe secrets were shared, more freely, or with more trust. But either way, what lived on in Briganka wasn't just ritual. It was resistance. a resistance encoded in diversity. They didn't just survive. They adapted, even when their names were erased from records, even when they couldn't say aloud who they were. Their DNA remembered. But could it remember what even names forgot? There's a test scientists run, one that maps your origins down to a few hundred base pairs. When they ran it on Sephardi Jews and Kurdish Jews, something impossible happened. They matched. Not kind of. Not close enough. Genetically indistinguishable. Two groups, thousands of miles apart. Different languages. Different stories. Same blood. And it didn't stop there. They started finding echoes, markers, signatures that kept showing up in Sephardic samples. J12F2.1, TM70, T2E, HV0B. Haplogroups that tell a story written long before Iberia, long before exile, before anyone ever whispered the word Sephardim. HV0B, found almost exclusively in crypto-Jewish women from Portugal. TM70, a Middle Eastern lineage, rare in Europe, yet somehow embedded in Sephardic men. T2E, a maternal thread that stretches from Turkish Jews to families in South Texas who light candles on Friday nights without knowing why. They weren't just names on a chart. They were ghosts in the genome, surfacing in places no one expected. One woman in the Caribbean, another in Bulgaria, a family in northern Mexico. No synagogue, no mezuzah, and yet there it was. A mutation passed down from a woman in Sepharad. A branch still alive. Some markers mixed. Others stayed pure. But none of them forgot. This is what DNA does. It remembers what history tries to erase. It carries names without syllables, prayers without parchment. And sometimes it reveals a deeper paradox. Because when researchers started measuring Iberian ancestry in Sephardic populations, the results didn't make sense. For people so rooted in Spain, why do some have almost no Iberian DNA at all? They say Sephardic Jews are Spanish, Iberian, born of the soil beneath Toledo and Seville. But the blood tells a stranger story. When scientists pulled the genome apart, looking for the Spanish code, it barely flickered. 1%, sometimes 3%, rarely more than 5%. And yet, these were the people expelled from Spain, who wrote in Ladino, who prayed toward Jerusalem but mourned for Cordoba. So where did their DNA go? Turns out it never quite lived in Spain to begin with. The deeper they looked, the more the threads unraveled. Italian signals, Greek imprints, a Berber pulse, running like a shadow through the North African coast. And at the root, always, was the Levant, older than Spain, older than the word Sephardic itself. Genetic clusters tell the tale in silence. Sephardim don't huddle with Spaniards or Portuguese. They drift closer to Kurdish Jews, sometimes Armenians, even Druze. Not neighbors, kin. What we've called Sephardic for centuries was never a place. It was a journey, a people who stopped in Iberia, but didn't start there, and wouldn't end there. It's a revelation that turns the whole narrative sideways. The homeland may not be where the songs were written, or where the exiles wept, but where the chromosomes still whisper, unchanged, unbroken. They called it exile, but maybe it was always a crossing. So, if Iberia was just one chapter in the bloodline, what does that say about identity? She didn't grow up Jewish. No synagogue, no Hebrew, just a recipe. Almendrot, eggplant, garlic, cheese. Passed down like scripture in her family. Cooked every Friday. No explanation. Then came the DNA. A whisper of Sephardic ancestry. And suddenly, the pieces rearranged themselves. Not a revelation, more like a haunting. A memory her blood had kept safe, even when the words were gone. But here's the truth. That memory doesn't live in genes alone. You can carry Sephardic DNA and never light a Shabbat candle. And you can have no detectable markers and still inherit the soul of Sepharad. Because identity is not a code. It's a mosaic. It's the rhythm of Ladino in a grandmother's lullaby. It's a secret blessing murmured over olive oil. It's the way a child knows, without knowing, when to hide. The science is real, but it isn't the whole story. And when we reduce identity to percentages and haplogroups, we risk turning something sacred into a statistic. That's the danger. to believe that only the blood matters, to forget the survival, the resistance, the choice to remember what the world tried to erase. For some, a single mutation sparked a journey back. For others, the absence of proof lit a fire even stronger. Because Sephardic identity lives in communities, in kitchens, in fragments, not always neat, not always genetic, but always alive. So as the tests get sharper, as algorithms learn to see what they once missed, we still have to ask, even if you can prove the bloodline, can you ever truly measure the legacy? But even this isn't the final mystery. They thought the story ended in 1492, a royal decree, a final exile, a door slammed shut on a people and their past. But 5 centuries later, the trail reappears. Not in Spain, not in Portugal, in the blood of a woman in Oaxaca, a man in the hills of Colombia, a family in San Antonio, Texas, lighting candles on Friday nights, not knowing why. When researchers scanned Latin American genomes, they found something unexpected: East Mediterranean signals, Sephardic DNA, in nearly a quarter of the samples. Not random, not recent, a genetic echo of ships that sailed west, under flags of empire, with secrets below deck. Crypto-Jews, conversos, those who fled not just the Inquisition, but the fear of themselves. They came as Catholics. They came with false names. But they brought more than they knew. Buried in church records, hidden in marriage certificates, wrapped inside colonial censuses. The lines hold. The surnames survive. The rituals, distorted by time, still flicker in kitchens and songs and silence. Some lineages trace back to Salonika, others to Livorno, some directly to Toledo, 1492. And the DNA, scattered across continents, still connects them. A fragmented people, reunited by a test they never knew they needed. And yet, we've only begun to look. The archives wait. The names are there. And every year, new discoveries rewrite what we thought we knew. Because this isn't the end of the story. It's the next act. The question now isn't whether Sepharad survived. It's this: what if your bloodline holds the next forgotten chapter of Sepharad?